I should have said something in October. That is the plainest way I know to begin this, and I have had 10 years to find plainer ones, so I trusted. My name is Declan Ashmore. I am the younger brother of Rowan Ashmore, the Duke of Thornacre, and I was present for the entirety of what I am about to tell you. The arrangement, the season, her departure, and the long, costly silence that followed. I watched it from close enough to have intervened and did not, because I was young and thought my brother knew what he was doing, and because Sylvie Carne was the kind of person who made it very difficult to imagine she needed rescuing. She did not, as it turned out. He was the one who needed it. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me begin where it actually began, which was not with her at all, but with my father's will. Our father, the late Duke of Thornacre, was a man of firm opinions and considerable capacity for meddling beyond the grave. He left behind a ducal estate in excellent repair, a wine cellar of legendary caliber, and a clause in his will that stipulated, in language so dry it seemed to have been written with a smirk, that the Thornacre estate income beyond the maintenance sum would remain in trust until the heir, my brother Rowan, had demonstrated to the satisfaction of the estate solicitor a functioning household, by which the will meant, specifically, a wife, a real one, present and recorded at Thornacre Hall for no fewer than 1 full county season. My father had held the opinion that Rowan required humanizing. He was not wrong. He simply deployed a legal instrument where a conversation might have served better, and now the legal instrument was my brother's problem. Rowan read the clause, set down the document, and said, "A season." "Yes," said Mr. Farley, the solicitor. "1 season satisfies it. 1 full county season, Your Grace, as defined by the parish calendar, the autumn assembly through the Epiphany Ball. Approximately 4 months. 4 months, Rowan said, in the tone of a man calculating the cost of a new fence line. I was sitting across from him in the Thornacre library, watching my brother treat the prospect of a wife the way he treated every other estate problem, as a matter of logistics. I had a great deal to say. I said none of it, because at 23 I had not yet learned that silence in the face of a poor decision is a form of complicity, and because, honestly, I could not have predicted what was coming. No one could have. He found Sylvie Carne through the most Rowan Ashmore means possible. He asked his land agent, who asked the parish records, who produced a list of unmarried women of gentle birth within a sensible radius, who were known to be in reduced circumstances and might welcome a structured arrangement. This is how Rowan thought, in sensible radii and structured arrangements. He had run the Thornacre dukedom since he was 19 years old, when our father's health first failed, and the habit of reducing things to their simplest operable form was so deeply worn into him by that point that he applied it without thinking even to things that required the opposite approach. Sylvie was the eldest daughter of the Reverend Mr. Carne of Haltwick, 4 miles north. Her father was in good health, but the living was poor, and her younger brother Thomas had completed his studies and was waiting on a patron to secure a church position. Sylvie herself had been managing the vicarage since she was 17, the accounts, the household, the parish visiting, the correspondence, and she had done it, by all accounts, with the same quality of quiet competence she would later bring to Thornacre Hall. She was 22 when the letter arrived. She read it twice, asked her father his opinion, received it, thought for a day, and wrote back accepting the terms. The arrangement Rowan proposed was this. Sylvie would present herself as the Duchess of Thornacre for the duration of the county season, maintain the household in the public role expected of a ducal wife, and attend the required social engagements alongside the Duke. In return, Rowan would secure Thomas Carne the living at Westmarsh, a comfortable position that had been in the Duke's gift for 2 generations, and would make a settlement on the Carne family sufficient to relieve the vicar of several pressing debts and see the vicarage roof repaired before winter. No feeling was specified in either direction. No feeling was asked for. The terms were precise, the duration was fixed, the exit was agreed in advance, and both parties knew exactly what they were walking into, or so they believed. You cannot specify, in a contract, what 4 months of proximity will do to a careful person who has never in his life allowed himself to want something without first calculating whether he deserved it. I read the letter of arrangement over Rowan's shoulder the morning he sent it, and I went for a very long walk. She arrived on a Tuesday in early September, in a hired carriage that had seen better decades, with 2 trunks, a hat box, a small leather satchel she kept on her person, and an expression of such composed practicality that Rowan, who had come to the front step to receive her with all the warmth of a man inspecting a delivery of estate timber, looked, just for a moment, fractionally uncertain, as though the category he had placed her in had already proved insufficient. I was standing behind him on the steps. I saw it. He would deny it to this day. She stepped down from the carriage, took in Thornacre Hall, which is, I should say, a house capable of inducing awe even in people who have steeled themselves against it. 300 years of gray stone against the northern sky, the kind of house that makes a person feel simultaneously very small and, if they are the right sort of person, entirely equal to it, without blinking. She assessed it the way she would later assess the estate accounts, thoroughly, without theater, and apparently without finding anything she hadn't anticipated. Then she said, "Your Grace, I hope the room facing east is available. I sleep badly when I cannot see the morning come." There was a pause. "It is available," Rowan said. "Thank you." She handed her satchel to no one in particular, because no one had moved to take it, tucked it back under her arm, and walked up the front steps between us as though she had done it 100 times. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hollis, met her in the entrance hall with the particular expression of a woman who has been running a great house single-handed for 3 years and is now genuinely uncertain whether the reinforcement arriving is adequate to the task. Sylvie took one look at Mrs. Hollis and said, "You have been managing this entirely alone, I think. I am very sorry it has taken this long. Shall we begin with the supply ledgers, or would you prefer to show me the rooms first?" Mrs. Hollis showed her the rooms. By the following morning they were deep in the supply ledgers together, and by the end of the week the relationship between them had settled into something collaborative and efficient that no one had asked for and everyone benefited from. I liked Sylvie immediately. This was not difficult. Liking Sylvie Carn was the natural condition of anyone who spent more than 10 minutes in her presence. Resisting it required a specific and effortful kind of armor. She was not charming in the way that demands attention. She did not try to be liked, which paradoxically made her very easy to like. She was simply present, fully, genuinely present in whatever she was doing, whether that was the supply ledgers or the parish visiting she undertook without being asked, or the way she listened when someone was speaking, with the quality of attention that makes a person feel they are the most important thing in the room. I asked her, the second week of September, how she had learned to run a household. "By running one," she said, "and by understanding that a house is not the building. A house is the people in it, and what they need, and whether anyone has bothered to find out." She paused. The Thornacre accounts tell a very clear story. This house has been managed at a distance for some years. The people in it have been holding it together on their own resources, which speaks well of them and less well of the arrangement. She did not say this as an accusation. She said it as a fact, as she said everything, cleanly, without softening it but without wielding it either. Just the thing, plainly. I told Rowan this. He looked up from his correspondence, considered it, and said, "Efficient," and went back to his letters. This was, I would like the record to show, both entirely characteristic and deeply insufficient. There was a dinner in October that I have thought about more than almost any other evening of that season. Rowan had been obliged to invite Sir Edmund Vane and his wife, a social necessity that neither of us relished, Sir Edmund being the sort of man who treats a dinner table as a venue for the establishment of his own opinions and the diminishment of everyone else's. He arrived with Lady Vane and their daughter, and a complacency that seemed to expand to fill whatever room he occupied. The dinner was 12 people, the Thornacre dining room candlelit, the service impeccable, because Mrs. Hollis ran an impeccable table. Sylvie sat at the foot of the table, where the Duchess of Thornacre sat, because this was the arrangement, and she had been performing the arrangement for 6 weeks, and had stopped, by October, performing it at all. She simply occupied the role the way she occupied the east-facing room, as though it had been waiting for her, and she had simply not arrived until now. Sir Edmund, midway through the second course, began to hold forth on the management of tenants, a subject on which he held views that were, charitably, 40 years out of fashion. He said several things about the dependence of the poor that made the room go a particular careful quiet, the kind that means everyone heard and no one is willing to be the first to speak. Sylvie said, "I visited the Alders farm last week, Sir Edmund. They have been working that land for 3 generations under the same lease terms. The harvest yields have increased by 1/3 in the past decade by their own effort, without any adjustment to those terms." She said this in a tone so matter-of-fact that it took Sir Edmund a moment to understand she was disagreeing with him. "I found them very resourceful people," she added pleasantly, and picked up her fork. Sir Edmund looked at her. Then he looked at Rowan. Rowan was looking at Sylvie. He said nothing, but something shifted in his face, something very small and very clear, and I recognized it because I had been watching my brother's face for 23 years, and what I was seeing was the expression of a man who has just realized that the person beside him is, on balance, considerably more than he had contracted for. He said, "The Alders terms come up for renewal in the spring. I had been intending to review them." He had not, to my knowledge, been intending to do anything of the kind before that moment. The dinner moved on, but I noticed that Rowan addressed most of his subsequent remarks, that evening, to the foot of the table. The county season was, by any external measure, a success. Sylvie appeared at the autumn assembly in a gown that Mrs. Hollis had helped her source from the Hall's stores, pale green silk that had belonged to my mother, altered with a neatness that the village seamstress pronounced better than the original, and she moved through the assembly rooms with the particular grace of someone who has made a clear decision about what she was doing and sees no reason to announce it. The county noticed. The county, which had spent 3 years noting the Thornacre dukedom going without a duchess, was visibly and collectively relieved. Rowan danced with her once, because the form required it, and he performed it correctly, because Rowan performed everything correctly. But I watched them from across the room, Sylvie saying something to him during the second figure, Rowan's head inclined toward her in the way he inclines toward things he is genuinely attending to, and I thought, this is already different from what he planned for. He did not see it yet. He was still, in September, treating her as a well-ordered part of the estate's seasonal requirements. He thanked her, in the formal written notes he left on the library desk, for various things she had done: the handling of the tenants' Michaelmas correspondence, the resolution of a long-standing dispute between 2 of the farm wives that Mrs. Hollis had been managing around for a year, the way she had handled the seating at the assembly dinner so that a particular set of neighboring families who had quarreled over a drainage boundary were placed at sufficient distance from each other to prevent incident. The notes were correct and impersonal. She responded in kind. They were, from the outside, the picture of a contracted arrangement being executed to specification. I danced with her twice at the autumn assembly, because I wanted to, and no one had told me not to. She told me, in the second dance, that the musician in the corner was playing a Haydn quartet arranged for a single violin, which she found either very ambitious or very lonely. She hadn't decided which. I said I thought probably both. She said, yes, probably both, and looked over my shoulder with an expression I could not name then and can name now, with the benefit of what came after. She was watching Rowan, who was speaking with the magistrate across the room, and her face had the look of a woman cataloguing something she has decided not to act on. The weeks moved. October arrived, which is Thornacre at its finest. The park turns amber, and the light off the moors in the morning has a quality of absolute honesty, as though the softer months had been a courtesy extended to the south, and the north is now having its real say. Sylvie walked the East Lane every morning before the household was awake. I know this because I am an early riser, and I saw her, more than once, moving along the lane between the beeches with her satchel and her particular upright walk, not hurrying, not meandering, simply going. One morning I was at the East Lane gate when she came back. She had her boots muddy and her face bright with cold, and she looked, in that moment, more herself than I had seen her look at any assembly room or dinner table. She stopped when she saw me. "The moor is very clear this morning," she said. "It usually is in October." "I grew up 4 miles away and never walked it," she said. "I find that strange now." She went inside. I stood at the gate for a while, thinking about people who go their whole lives 4 miles from something they would have loved, and then I went inside too, and I resolved to say something to Rowan that evening. I did not say anything that evening. I gave it until November. This was my second error. Rowan saw her from the upper terrace one morning in late October. I was beside him. We had been discussing the drainage works on the lower field. A real discussion, not a pretense of one, because the lower field drainage was a genuine problem. When she appeared on the lane below, small in the amber distance, her dark coat distinct against the turning trees. Rowan stopped speaking mid-sentence. I waited. He watched her for a moment. Then, "She goes early. Every morning, I think. In all weather? Yesterday was quite wet. I saw her coming back past the stables." He said nothing, watched the lane a moment longer. "Then I should look at the drainage figures for the east field before the weather turns," and went inside. I stood on the terrace in the October air and decided to give it until November. This was the third time I would give it until the next month, and I would eventually run out of months, but in October I did not yet understand that. The conservatory was what finally cracked the arrangement's surface. The Thornacre Conservatory was my mother's project. Glass and iron along the south face of the hall, warm even in the northern October, packed with plants she had spent 15 years tending before she left for Bath 6 years prior. When Sylvie arrived, it was still technically alive, in the manner of something that intends to outlast the neglect, but is not enjoying it. No one had been given particular charge of it, and Mrs. Hollis's people kept it watered without understanding it. Sylvie began spending time in there in the second week of October. No one asked her to. I suspect the conservatory was the kind of problem she was constitutionally unable to walk past, a living thing that needed someone, and she was available. She had a written set of references on plants that she had either brought with her or sourced from somewhere in the first weeks, and by the end of October the orchids that had been declining since my mother's departure had begun, with extreme conservatism, to indicate that they intended to recover. Rowan went to the conservatory to speak with her about the Epiphany Ball guest list. This was in the first week of November. I know the stated reason because he told me afterward, in the distant voice of a man reporting on a matter of no significance. He had a list of names to confirm. The Epiphany Ball was the concluding event of the season. It needed to be arranged. It was a practical matter. There was no particular reason to conduct it in the conservatory except that she was there, and the conservatory was where she was. He came back to the library 2 hours later. I know it was 2 hours because I had been watching the clock in the way a man watches a clock when he suspects something is happening that he should have foreseen. He stood in the doorway for a moment with a look on his face I had seen exactly once before in my life. The morning we went to London for the first time, when Rowan was 12 and I was 9, and the city opened in front of us through the carriage window, and Rowan went entirely still, with that particular look of someone confronted with something so obviously large that their ordinary framework has temporarily given way. Then he came in and sat down and picked up his correspondence. "The conservatory is in considerably better order than it was," he said. "Yes," I said. "The orchids are responding. She has a method for the water temperature." "I did not know orchids were particular about the temperature of the water," I said. "Apparently quite particular," he said. He said this in the voice of a man who has just learned something that he will not be forgetting. He went back to the conservatory the following evening, and the one after that, and by mid-November they were meeting there most evenings, Sylvie tending the plants, Rowan having apparently discovered the conservatory's considerable merits, talking in the easy manner of two people who have found that they think better when someone else is in the room. I know this because Mrs. Hollis mentioned it to me in the careful phrasing of a woman who reports facts without drawing conclusions, and because I checked. And then, the chair. Rowan's particular chair from the library, a low-backed one with good arms that he had favored since he was 15, shaped by years of use to a specific and personal contour, moved to the conservatory without comment in the last week of November. He did not mention it. He did not acknowledge having done it. It was simply gone from the library and present in the conservatory, positioned in relation to the second chair, a smaller one that Sylvie used, with the accuracy of someone who had thought about where to put it. This is what love looks like in a careful man who does not know he has it yet. Not declarations, not gestures, a chair, moved without comment, to be in the same room as the person he needed. I gave up on saying something in November. By December, it was, I think, also too late for saying to do anything useful, not because they had come to any understanding, but because they had come to a state of things that felt, from the inside, like sufficiency. The pretense had stopped being a pretense without either of them deciding it. They had simply continued to inhabit the same house with the natural ease of two people for whom proximity had quietly become necessary, and the arrangement that had brought them there was still the official version of events, which meant no one had to examine what the actual version was. This is what I have come to understand about careful people. They find ways to have things they have not admitted wanting. The Epiphany Ball was the 3rd of January. It was everything a Thornacre ball was supposed to be. The great hall chandelier lit, the county present in their best, the musicians from the assembly accurate enough not to embarrass, the dining table arranged by Mrs. Hollis to a standard that drew comment from 3 separate guests who had attended Thornacre dinners under my mother and found them equal to the memory. Sylvie wore ivory silk. Her dark hair was dressed with something small and bright at the temple, a small arrangement of seed pearls that had been her mother's, I later learned. She stood at the head of the receiving stair beside Rowan for 3/4 of an hour, while the county filed past, and she said exactly the right thing to each person. Warmth to the people who needed warmth, the correct question to the people who needed to be asked one, a kind formality to the people who would have been embarrassed by too much intimacy. It was not performance. It was simply that she had spent 4 months learning what the county was and what it needed, and now she was delivering it naturally, as a woman who understood that a great house is not the building but the people in it, and whether anyone has bothered to find out. Rowan stood beside her all evening. The form required proximity. The form was satisfied, but he stood somewhat closer than the form strictly required, and twice I watched him say something quietly to her that was not intended for anyone else, and watched the corner of her mouth change in response. They danced once, because the form required it. They danced a second time, because neither of them moved when the next set formed. I stood at the edge of the room and did not say anything. The time for saying things had been October. It was now January. At the end of the evening, when the last carriage had gone, and the chandelier was being brought down, and Mrs. Hollis's people were moving through the great hall with the efficient quiet of a well-commanded ship, Sylvie stood in the entrance hall with her ivory gloves in one hand and looked at the vacated space with an expression I could not read in the moment but have thought about many times since. Not satisfaction, not sadness, not the relief of an obligation discharged. Something cleaner than all of those. The look of a person who has done a thing well and has also, with total clarity, already begun letting it go. Then she looked across the hall at Rowan, who was speaking with Mr. Farley near the library door. He was not looking at her. She looked at him for 3 seconds, perhaps 4. Then she went upstairs. She left on the morning of the 9th of January. She left the east-facing room exactly as she had found it. The bedclothes folded, the dressing table bare, every object in its correct original place. There was a letter on the writing desk, sealed, addressed to Rowan in her handwriting, clear and particular and unmistakably hers. There was nothing addressed to me. I took the letter to Rowan in the library and set it on his desk without a word. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he opened it, read it, and set it down, and his face was entirely still in the way that stillness is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of too much of it, held behind a locked door. "She thanks me for honoring the terms," he said. I waited. "She says Mrs. Hollis knows which fertilizer to use for the orchids. She has left the instructions written out." I looked at the letter. From where I stood, I could see it was a full page in her hand, more than the 2 sentences he had reported, but I did not ask. If there was more, it was between him and the page. "Rowan," I said. "I am aware," he said, in a voice that meant, "I am aware, and I know what I should have done, and I am going to put that understanding where I put everything else I cannot afford to act on, behind the work of the dukedom, and it will stay there until I decide what to do about it." He did not speak about her again. He managed the estate as he had always managed it, precisely, without complaint, without the surface of anything showing through. He attended the county assemblies. He chaired the magistrate's bench. He responded to every letter. He did not look for another wife. Year passed, then another, then another. The years accumulated in specific ways. I want to be honest about this because I think it matters for understanding what my brother is. Not a man who suffered dramatically or fell apart in any visible fashion, but a man who lived with a very precise, very particular absence in the way that careful people live with things they have not found a way to address. He did not become careless. He did not become bitter. He was, by every external measure, entirely as he had always been. But there were small things. The chair in the conservatory that he never moved back, the orchid instructions, kept and consulted, the east-facing room, which Mrs. Hollis once mentioned she had been asked to keep available, not for any specific guest, just kept, and which sat ready and waiting, aired and dusted, the same pale curtains, for 10 years. I asked him about this once, the 4th year, carefully. He said it was simply good housekeeping to maintain the rooms. He said this without meeting my eyes, which is the only time in my life I have known Rowan Ashmore to be dishonest. He was, in the 7th year, invited to stand for the county candidacy, a position that would have required him to be in London for significant portions of the year, to maintain a house there, to move in social circles that might reasonably have been expected to produce another prospect for the role that Sylvie Carne had vacated. He declined it. He said the estate required his attention. This was true, and it was also not the full reason, and I let it pass because there was nothing I could usefully say that I had not already failed to say in October, 7 years prior. Mr. Farley noted this at the 2nd year, with the delicacy of a man performing a duty he wishes were unnecessary. Rowan told him the estate requirements had been satisfied, and the matter was closed. Mr. Farley, to his credit, did not press. He understood, I think, more than he was paid to. The conservatory chair stayed where it was. I noted this every time I visited. 3rd year, still there. 5th year, still there. The orchids were still being tended according to her written instructions, which someone, Rowan, I was fairly certain, had been following with the same precision he applied to everything. I once caught him reading those instructions in the morning light by the conservatory window. He folded them away when he heard me come in, but not before I had seen his face, which had the expression of a man reading something he has read many times and has not finished with yet. He had her handwriting, and he was keeping it. I left for the continent in the spring of the 2nd year, because I had intended to, and because Thornacre without Sylvie Carne was not a comfortable house to inhabit for extended periods. I visited when I could. I wrote to Thomas Carne once, at Westmarsh, and he wrote back warmly and mentioned that his sister was well, which I had not asked, and I was glad he had said it anyway. It was through Thomas, eventually, that I found where she had gone, Aldwych, 3 miles south of Haltwick, in the market town, a small school above the draper's shop on Mercer Street. The town had taken to calling it Carne's School. She taught reading, figuring, French, and, Thomas said with particular pride, the same method of account-keeping she had learned at the vicarage and refined at Thornacre Hall. She had been there 6 years by the time I made the inquiry. She had taken nothing from Thornacre except what she had arrived with and what she had learned. I sat with this information for a month. Then I went to the library after dinner one evening in autumn, the 8th year after she had left, and I said, "Do you know where she is?" He did not ask who I meant. "No," he said, after a pause that was itself the answer. "I do," I said. I told him about Aldwych, about Mercer Street and the draper's shop and the school and the 12 girls and the account-keeping method she had carried away and was using to teach other people's daughters. I told him about Thomas at Westmarsh, his wife and 2 children, that she visited at Christmas. He listened with all his attention. When I had finished, he said, "That is all?" "That is all I have to say," I said. He nodded, once, and looked at the fire. 4 days later he went to Aldwych. He told me afterward, though I had not asked. He stayed in Aldwych for 2 hours. I know this because I was watching the clock in the way a man watches a clock when something is being decided somewhere 3 miles away without him. When he came back, he told me more than I expected him to. He told me that the schoolroom smelled of chalk and paper and the particular quality of autumn sun through south-facing glass. He told me that she had 3 red dictionaries stacked at the corner of the table where she was marking, and that one of them had a page turned down at the letter L. He told me that she was wearing a dark dress with a small white collar, and her hair was simpler than she had worn it at Thornacre, less formal, more herself, and that when he came through the door she looked up, and there was a moment, perhaps 2 seconds, in which something passed across her face that was not quite surprise and not quite the expression he would have expected from a woman who had decided how she felt about this possibility in advance. He said he thought, in that moment, that she had not decided as cleanly as she had intended, that something in her preparation had not fully prepared her for the specific reality of him in a doorway. He said this quietly, without triumph, with the honesty of a man who is attempting to be accurate rather than favorable. "I nearly lost my nerve," he said. "But you did not," I said. "She set down her pen," he said, very deliberately, as though she was giving me the full space to continue, and I thought, she is deciding, right now, how much room to give this. She hasn't decided yet. Which meant I still had something to say. I have thought about this a great deal since. A careful woman meeting a careful man, 10 years later, in a schoolroom in Aldwych. Both of them taking stock. Both of them deciding, in those 2 seconds, how much of what they had been carrying they were willing to set down. He found Mercer Street without difficulty. The school was above the Drapers, as I had said, a narrow staircase, a room with 6 long tables, an unlit fireplace because it was May and warm. She was marking work at the front table. She looked up when he came in. She did not look surprised. Precisely. She looked like a woman who had considered this possibility and worked out how she felt about it in advance, and was now checking her preparation against the reality of him standing in a schoolroom doorway. "Your Grace," she said. "I have been trying to find the correct thing to say for 10 years, he said, "and I have not found it." She set down her pen. "That is, at least, honest." He said, "I should have asked you to stay. I knew on the 9th of January that I should ask. I did not ask, and I have been understanding the cost of that calculation ever since." She was quiet, the quiet that gives a person room to keep going, because they are not finished. "The arrangement was wrong," he said. "I agreed to a pretend wife for 1 season. What I had, for those 4 months, was the real thing. I simply lacked, at the time, the honesty to say so." Below them, the draper's shop bell rang, small, ordinary, a street sound from another world. She said, "The position is not open." He said, "I did not come to offer the same position." She looked at him with the look I had seen once before, in the entrance hall at the Epiphany Ball, the clear, clean look of a woman taking stock with no particular intention of softening the accounting. "What position are you offering, then?" "Whatever one you are willing to fill," he said. "On your terms. You would make better terms than I did. That seems only fair." It was quiet again, long enough that I imagine he understood exactly what was at stake, which is, I think, what she intended. Then she said, "I will need the east-facing room." He said, "It has been available for 10 years. She looked at him for a long moment, and whatever was in her face then, he described it to me as something that was not quite a smile and not quite a surrender, something older and more particular than either. She said quietly, "That is also honest." They were married in May, in the village church at Aldwych, where the Reverend Mr. Carne had married her parents 28 years before. Thomas stood up for her. I stood up for Rowan. Perhaps 30 people were there, including several Thornacre tenants who appeared without having been invited, and whom no one turned away, because they had waited long enough. The reception was at the vicarage, the new roof having been quietly arranged by Rowan in the 6 weeks between her agreement and the wedding, which Sylvie noted without comment, and the Reverend Mr. Carne accepted with the speed of a man who has been worrying about the roof for 3 winters. Sylvie wore the pale green silk from the autumn assembly, altered once more. She had kept it, all those years. Rowan told me this the week before the wedding, not in passing but directly, in the way he tells me things that matter. I sat with it for a long while, because keeping a dress for 10 years is not an accident, and it is not sentiment. It is a form of certainty. She had known what it was, the season, what had been real in it. She had kept it the way he had kept the chair in the conservatory and the orchid instructions in her handwriting and the route to an October window, because a person who is not finished with something does not throw it away. I gave a toast at the vicarage reception. I had prepared something careful and abandoned it in favor of what was true, that I should have said something in October, and that the only consolation I could offer was that they had found their way here regardless, by the longer road, and the longer road had shown them something the short one would not have, what a person is made of when they are alone with the cost of their own calculations. Rowan looked at his glass, Sylvie looked at me, and there was something in it, not quite tears, not in Sylvie, but something adjacent to what tears do, a recognition. And then she looked away and was entirely composed again, which is, I have come to understand, how Sylvie Carne is moved, quickly, privately, and with great dignity. I have visited Thornacre 3 times since they married, and I want to be plain about what I have seen. The conservatory chair is still where it was, but there is a second chair now, lower, with a cushion in a particular blue wool that Sylvie stitched herself, positioned at an angle to his, with a small table between them just wide enough for 2 cups. The orchids are excellent. The conservatory in the evenings has the specific quality of a room that 2 people have been inhabiting long enough to leave their shape in it, the way rooms do when they are genuinely and regularly used. Sylvie still teaches, in the East Wing room that had been an unused parlor since my mother left. 12 girls from the estate families, and 4 from Haltwick Village. Rowan has made it a line in the estate accounts, a budget, a maintenance schedule, books he keeps with the same precision he applies to the drainage works. Sylvie has looked at this without apparent surprise and accepted it without requiring it to look different, because she understands by now that account books and maintenance schedules are the form in which my brother's deepest caring expresses itself, and that a man who creates a budget line for the thing you love most is, in his own particular language, saying everything. What she is, in Thornacre now, and I say this as someone who watched it build from the beginning, is not the Duchess in the official sense, though she is that too, and wears it as naturally as she wore the green silk. What she is, specifically, is the person without whom the house does not know itself, not because she is indispensable to its running, though she is, and Mrs. Hollis would tell you so, but because Thornacre Hall in the years before she came was a house managed from a distance, held together by the goodwill of people who had not been given the attention they deserved, inhabited by a man who had never let himself want something he hadn't budgeted for. It was a house that did not know it was missing its center until the center arrived and then left, and in the absence finally named itself. She is the east-facing room. She is the morning light. She is the second chair. Rowan told me once, last summer, in the conservatory, with the long northern evening coming golden through the glass, that the worst part of the 10 years had not been the loneliness. He is accustomed to solitude. Solitude has its own routines, and he has always been comfortable with his own company in the way of a man who has spent most of his life working. The worst part, he said, was knowing exactly what he had done wrong and being unable to stop knowing it, unable to set it down, unable to find a version of events in which his own calculation had been anything other than a failure of courage dressed up as propriety. I told myself, he said, that the arrangement had been honored, that she had left because the season ended, and that was what she had agreed to, that reaching out afterward would be an imposition. He was quiet for a moment. I knew, while I was telling myself this, that it was not quite true, that the arrangement had been the container, not the thing. "What changed?" I said. "In the 8th year, what made you go?" He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might not answer. "I was reading the orchid instructions," he said, finally. A Tuesday morning, October, and I realized I had been reading them for 8 years, and they were still in her handwriting, and I was not going to stop reading them. And the sensible thing at that point was to go and find out whether there was anything left to be said. He said this with absolute simplicity, as though it were the most reasonable thing in the world, as though 8 years and a wrong calculation and a schoolroom on Mercer Street were a perfectly ordinary path to a Tuesday in a conservatory, with 2 chairs and the evening light coming gold through the glass. I suppose, in the end, they were. I asked her once, last autumn, in the conservatory in the November light, whether she had expected him to come. She did not answer immediately. She was repotting something, her hands steady and unhurried in the dirt. "I thought he might," she said. "The chair." "What about the chair?" "He moved it in November, and he never moved it back." She set down the pot. "A man who has finished with a thing moves it back. He left it where it was for 10 years. That is not a man who is finished." I considered this for a while. "You kept the dress," I said. She looked at me sidelong. "That was a very good dress," she said. It was not entirely the answer. But it was the right one, for her. She had kept the dress for the same reason he had kept the chair, and the orchid instructions, and the habit of standing at that particular east window on October mornings. Because careful people who are not finished with something do not throw it away. They keep it somewhere safe, in the dry quiet of a wardrobe or a conservatory corner, and they wait to see what the calculation finally yields. It yielded this: a woman in pale green silk on a May morning in her father's church, a man beside her with no calculation left in his face, a room of 30 people who had been waiting for this morning for longer than was strictly polite and who felt themselves entirely entitled to be there, a conservatory with 2 chairs. I should have said something in October. He said it on Mercer Street, 10 years later, in a schoolroom above a draper's shop, standing in the doorway as a man stands when he has finally finished being careful and has arrived, entirely, at the thing he meant. There is no wrong moment for the true thing. There is only the moment it arrives, and what you do when it does. A careful person may be very slow, may move a chair and keep a letter and read instructions in the morning light rather than say the word plainly. But careful people, when they finally arrive completely. He did not say, "Perhaps we might consider." He stood in that doorway and said, "I should have asked you to stay. I knew it on the 9th of January. I have been understanding the cost ever since." And she said, "The east-facing room." And he said, "It has been available for 10 years. That was, after everything, the whole of it, simply, at last. Some things are slower than they should be. They are not less true for it. I know that now. I have the evidence of it, living at Thornacre Hall with a second chair in the conservatory, and a budget line in the estate accounts for 12 girls learning to read and figure and keep their own accounts, in their own hand, in their own future. She is the Duchess of Thornacre. She has been, in all the ways that matter, since September. The papers caught up with the truth in May. That is the whole of the story. I am glad I was there for it. I am glad, even, that I said nothing in October, because the man who watched it from the outside has a clearer view of what it was than the man who was inside it, and I would not trade the view, not the long road, not the decade, not the morning I walked into the library with her letter and set it on his desk. Not the afternoon he came back from Aldwych with that look on his face, the look of a man who has done the irreversible thing and is not sorry. Not the expression on his face when she said plainly that the east-facing room would do. I have never seen anyone more certain of anything. He had not calculated that look. It had simply arrived, the way true things do, without a schedule, without a budget line, too obvious by the time it got there to require a single word.